As discussed in class, we're going to do the English Reformation via video. This will be included on your exam. You are responsible for this information. Just a warning I give every time, I do a video like this. Don't try to take it all in at once. I have no idea sitting here how long I'm going to go. Maybe an hour, maybe 40 minutes. I don't know. But break your viewing up into 5 or 10-minute segments. You're much more likely to retain the information. And I promise if you pause me, I will be there when you come back. All right. So let's dig into it. I think most people at some point in their life have heard about the 6 wives of Henry VIII, and this is really what we're talking about here when we discuss the cause of the English Reformation. The man on the left, Henry VIII, King of England, was told no by the Pope when asked for a divorce from his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. We know that the Catholic Church was strong pretty much everywhere. It was the only game in town for a good long time. It was strong in England. Henry VIII was a devout Catholic. Henry VIII was given the title of Defender of the Faith for reasons which we will get into here in a little bit by the Pope. It had to do with a pamphlet he had written, but again, we'll talk about that a little later. So England followed a different path. There's no, it's nothing like the Anabaptists, the Calvinists, what we've discussed in class. This is something a little different, again, stemming from the fact that Henry was told no when asked for a divorce. So Henry's Church of England, it retained many aspects of Catholic worship because, and again, this is an educated opinion, but someone might disagree with me. It's because I have come to believe through my own research and delving into this area that he was, meaning Henry, a Catholic through and through to the end of his life. Again, it was the issue of the divorce from Catherine of Aragon that really caused the breakup and the Reformation itself. So he has this church, the Church of England. He's the head, the supreme governor. It's like a Catholic Mass in so many ways, but it's aligned in the Protestant camp because the Pope is not the recognized head of the church. It's Henry. Henry opposed the Protestant Reformation initially. He and Luther said some really not so nice things about each other, which we'll get into again. But he receives this title of Defender of the Faith from Pope Leo X for a treatise, which is a written work that he writes against Martin Luther. Now, I don't know how interesting it is. I find it interesting anyway, that the British monarchs are still using this title, Defender of the Faith. Charles III is Defender of the Faith because Charles III today, like all of his ancestors since the Reformation, is at the head of the Church of England. So this treatise that he writes, meaning Henry, and again, forgive me because I'm probably going to butcher the Latin, Assertio Septem Sacramentorum, which means defense of the 7 sacraments. And this was more likely than not written in conjunction with help from Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, who was the Lord Chancellor of England for a long while at the start of Henry's reign, as well as Archbishop of York, and Thomas More, who was sainted, made a saint by the Catholic Church after he was killed, really, by Henry. So this Assertio, it's a response to Martin Luther, whose ideas helped shape the Protestant Reformation. And we've looked at Luther every which way in class, so enough said with that. Henry is really trying to defend the church, and he's trying to defend the supremacy of the papacy, and he really goes to bat for the Holy Father, using less than holy language. I will not subject you to my attempts at Latin pronunciation. I think I've done that probably more than enough over the course of the last 2 weeks. But he calls Luther things like a venomous serpent, a pernicious disease, a wolf of hell, the devil's member, and a detestable trumpeter of pride, abuses, and schism. So, I mean, very polite language, I think, by today's standards of insulting someone. Henry compares even Martin Luther to Cerberus, and Cerberus in classical mythology is the three-headed dog that guards the underworld. This thing's published in mid-July 1521. They hold it. It's only made available and distributed to the public after John Clerk, the Bishop of Bath and Wells, presents it to the Pope in a ceremony on October 2nd, 1521. Henry includes a letter in the text to the Holy Father dedicating the work to him. And following its presentation to the Holy Father in Rome, it circulated throughout Europe, and it went on to be a major bestseller, going into over a dozen editions, both in German and Latin, by the end of 1524. And we've stressed the importance, I know in class, of publishing texts, whatever texts really, but the Bible, let's say, for example, in the local dialect, and how important that is to the understanding and the mass distribution of ideas that anybody might have. So it even earned the attention of Luther, who wrote a reply in the form of a book called Against Henry, King of the English, and he wasn't particularly polite in there with his well, he's not polite to the king, and we'll just leave it at that. Pope Leo, though, was pleased with the work, and why not? It was dedicated to him. It is vigorously defending him as the Vicar of Christ, the office of the papacy, the Catholic Church, and a few weeks after its presentation, he issues a papal bull, which is, think of it like an executive order, conferring on Henry the title of Defender of the Faith. And we talked about that before. The language of the bull was glowing, really, with the Pope saying that, having thus weighed and diligently considered your singular merits, we could not have devised a more suitable name, nor one more worthy of your majesty than this most excellent title, which whenever you hear or read it, you shall remember your own virtues and highest merits. So really, not too bad for a day's work. What serpent so venomous is he who calls the Pope's authority tyrannous? No punishment was enough for someone who will not obey the chief priest and supreme judge on earth, Christ's only vicar, the Pope of Rome. King Henry VIII, from the text of the Assertio. This language strikes me, at least, as I had said before, as being incredibly polite by today's standards, but he was really giving it to Luther. Luther says, lubberly ass, that frantic madman, that king of lies, by God's disgrace, King of England. A little less polite, but I think this, if this was a movie today, it might be rated PG-13, somewhere in the middle. I don't know what that says about our society, but there it is. So I get copyright strikes when I have tried to do this in the past, so click on the link and watch it, please. So over time, though, and here we're coming to the divorce, his political needs proved to be more important than his loyalty to the Holy Father. And we talk about the 6 wives here. Number 1, Catherine of Aragon, Catharina de Aragona, daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the famed Spanish monarchs. This was called the King's Great Matter. That's how it was referred to. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, the point was really that neither of them were getting any younger. Henry still didn't have a male heir. Back then, females just simply wouldn't do, so you needed a son. And again, Catherine wasn't giving him one. We didn't know, also, back then, humanity as a whole, that it was really Henry's fault because the man controls, well, he doesn't, that's a bad way of saying it. The man determines the sex of the child. If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They shall be childless. Leviticus 20:21. This is the verse Henry uses as a defense for his annulment request from Catherine. Catherine had been married to his older brother, Arthur, Prince of Wales. They both got sick. Catherine survived. Arthur didn't. So Leviticus, if a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Henry uses this verse to support his divorce. Then there's Deuteronomy. And this is where there's some confusion because there's some contradiction here. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead shall not be remarried outside of the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. So, if your brother dies, you got to marry his wife, if there was one, and have a son. So this weakens Henry's case, and the opposition uses this verse too, because it doesn't really appear, to my mind, it does mandate what Leviticus strictly forbids. So which one is right? And this was the debate for a time anyway, Leviticus or Deuteronomy. I mean, opinions varied, opinions still do vary. So Henry asks for this annulment, and an annulment is different from a divorce. An annulment means the thing never happened. You were never married. And he wants that to end his marriage with Catherine. Pope says no. Into the picture comes Anne Boleyn, who he's fallen in love with. He was also carrying on with Anne Boleyn's sister sometime between Anne Boleyn and Catherine. Mary Boleyn was one of his mistresses. So 1529 to 1534 here, the Reformation Parliament, they pass a series of laws that give Henry the ultimate authority over religious matters in England. Now, this isn't the Parliament of today, obviously, where if Charles III asked for something like that, then, it's 50-50 whether it would get passed. Back then, if the king, you can see the king right there, asks for something, it's not an ask. It's a royal decree. And while they were below the Pope, it was still believed that kings and queens were God's representatives. God chose them to be who they were. And it's they were again subject to the authority of the Pope, who was the ultimate arbiter of spiritual matters, but it was a big thing. If the king wanted something, the king got it. So the act in restraint of appeals officially ends the Pope's authority in England. And this was pretty contentious. The crucial statute here was enacted. The Act of Restraint of Appeals baldly decreed that this realm of England is an empire. And we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty, because we could, and I really don't want this video to be hours long, of the difference between a kingdom and an empire, and why the head of a kingdom is different from an emperor. But the fact that England is declared an empire gives Henry an extra bit of oomph in his case, and in the fact that he's really now the new head of this Church of England. So Anne Boleyn, 1533 to 1536. Henry divorces Catherine by the power invested in him by him, really. He marries Anne Boleyn and has probably the greatest monarch those islands have ever seen, Elizabeth I. Now that is an opinion on my part, but the fact that Elizabeth comes from Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII is fact. So the Act of Supremacy is passed, and this makes Henry the head of the new Church of England. And this was contentious, because ideas, if I haven't stressed this enough in person, let me do it again, ideas are terribly hard things to kill. That we're declaring now that the Pope is fallible, that there could be an instance where a new church could be set up and the king is its head. I mean, even though the king, has some authority and is God's anointed, still secondary to the Pope, it was an idea that really shook people and made many uncomfortable. This wasn't passed without a bit of a fight. And again, in the interest of not having a 12-hour-long video, we'll leave it there. But the Act of Supremacy is passed. It makes Henry the head of the new Church of England. That definitely is going to be a test question. You don't need to do this. So Parliament in 1534 passes the Act of Supremacy, as I said, which defined the right of Henry VIII to be supreme head on earth of the Church of England, thereby severing ecclesiastical ties with Rome. Again, maybe doesn't seem that important today, but this was earth-shattering. This was an earth-shattering proclamation that the Pope was not head of the church, was not, could be replaced as the head of the church. It was just mind-blowing. And it led to quite a bit of drama, which we'll talk about shortly.